Hi guys, so in this video I want to look at the normal light reflex pathway and the accommodation reflex. So this is vital to get our heads around, as pupillary examinations are very often performed by doctors to give a quick assessment not only for the nerves from the eyes but also for brainstem function. So take the example of a road traffic accident and traumatic brain injury. The emergency medicine doctors and trauma nurses will need to do a pupillary examination to assess whether parts of the brainstem are damaged. You can also think of the eyes as an extension of the brain itself. The pupil assessment should include the examination of the size and the quality of the pupils, pupillary shape, and reactivity to light. Let's look at the light reflex first. Physiological control of pupillary size has both parasympathetic component, which I've got here, and a sympathetic component as well, which we'll look at. So we'll take a look at the parasympathetic route first, and it's a 4-order neuron route, and that essentially means that there's 4 steps in the pathway, and we can break it down into 4 steps. So first, let's take the example. We've got a light stimulus in the left eye. So when an afferent light stimulus is detected by the retina of the left eye, the retinal ganglion cells, just like in the visual pathway in the other video, retinal ganglion axons project through the optic nerve, so cranial nerve 2, to the optic chiasm. Again, as with the visual pathway, the nasal fibers cross over, so you can see these nasal fibers crossing over to the side. They decussate, and they form the 2 optic tracts again, and some of these fibers synapse at the pretectal nuclei of the midbrain. So this is in the midbrain now, not the thalamus, but the midbrain, because that's where the pretectal nuclei are. So notice how this is different from the visual pathway. When we were looking at visual fields in the visual pathway, the fibers synapse in the lateral geniculate nucleus, but for the light reflex, they are not using this. They're using the pretectal nucleus here. And there's a left and right pretectal nuclei in the brain, in the midbrain. And this is where you can say that that's where the first order neurons end up. So the first step, so we're going from the retina to pretectal nucleus. Okay. Now let's have a look at the second step. So the second step, second order neuron, that connects each pretectal nuclei to both the ipsilateral and contralateral Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So this is also in the midbrain as well. So the EWN, the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, from each pretectal nucleus, there is a secondary neuron to both the ipsilateral EWN and the contralateral EWN. And that allows for the consensual pupillary reflex. So when you shine a light in just the left eye, you will find that both the left pupil and the right pupil constrict. That's the consensual pupillary reflex. The direct reflex is where you shine a light in the left eye and the left pupil will constrict. The consensual reflex means that both of them will constrict, and that's a normal reflex. Because of this relay point, we've got each pretectal nucleus goes to each EWN. So the second neuron is from the pretectal nucleus to the EWN, and it's both the contralateral and ipsilateral one. Now the third order neuron, the EWN then supplies the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers to the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 3, and this traverses the cavernous sinus and enters the orbit via the superior orbital fissure to synapse at ciliary ganglion. That's a bit of a hefty step, so let's break that down. So from each Edinger-Westphal nucleus, so remember they've received impulses from the pretectal nucleus, they then travel in the parasympathetic fibers originate from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus and they travel in the oculomotor nerve. They follow the oculomotor nerve path. So oculomotor nerve, remember, it exits the cranium by the superior orbital fissure, which I'll show you in the skull, through the cavernous sinus as well, and ends up the ciliary ganglion, which is around here. So that's where the ciliary ganglion is here. So the third goes from the EWN to the ciliary ganglion. I remember we said round about here that's where the path of the crane of 3 is in the cavernous sinus. And if we remember from anatomy, if we can go through some brief anatomy, so this is the oculomotor nerve, this is the cavernous sinus, and the cavernous sinus has quite a few structures in it, important structures. So not only cranial nerve 3, where the parasympathetic fibers are in this oculomotor nerve, you've also got the trochlear nerve, ophthalmic nerve, maxillary nerve, abducens, and internal carotid. And that's quite important from a clinical perspective. If you have a pathology there, obviously you've got some instructions nearby, and that can affect it. Okay, so, and we said also it exits the cranium via the superior orbital fissure. Now, where is that? So, this is from Mornegger Clinical Anatomy. So, this here is a superior orbital fissure. So, if you were to look, this is the eye socket, and that's the superior orbital fissure. This would be the inferior orbital fissure. Oh, that's the inferior orbital fissure. Okay, that just gives you a bit of orientation. And this red, this is the sphenoid bone, it's frontal bone. So that gives you some maxillary bone here. So that gives you some orientation. Okay, so we've done the third order neuron, and the last fourth order neuron is now the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers from the ciliary ganglion, and they go in the short ciliary nerve and reach the sphincter pupillae to cause constriction. So that's the normal light reflex. We've talked a bit about the consensual pupillary reflex as well. So just to simplify that, I mean, we can simplify that in a simple flow chart here. So pretend this is the left and the right eye. So you have fibers from the retina go to each pretectal nucleus from the left and right eye. And each pretectal nucleus, so if we were to, well, let's just pretend, say this is the left eye like before, this is the right eye, okay? So if you were to shine a light in this left eye, the fibers that would be activated, so from the retina to the pretectal nucleus, and from each pretectal nucleus, remember both the contralateral and the ipsilateral, oh, it's not good, and the ipsilateral ending of Westphal nucleus are activated. And parasympathetic fibers originate in this nucleus, and the preganglionic fibers reach the ciliary ganglion, and the postganglionic fibers then reach the sphincter pupillae. And that means you get the bilateral constriction of the pupils because of the consensual pupillary reflex. And it'd be the same with the right eye as well if we were to do the same thing. But this is the key aspect here of the consensual reflex. Okay. So we've looked at the parasympathetic pathway. Now, the innervation to the eye, in terms of the pupil control, has a sympathetic component as well, which we can have a look at here. So the sympathetic pathway has a 3-order neuron route, so it has 3 major steps. So actually, the first order neuron originates from the hypothalamus and travels down the brainstem to the ciliospinal center of Budge, which is this area here, the ciliospinal center of Budge, and that's the nerve roots C8 to T1, C8 to T2, sorry, C8 to T2. And then there's a synapse here and the second order neuron route. It goes over the long apex and synapses at the superior cervical ganglion. So the fact that it goes over the lung is that's a key thing to note for things like Horner syndrome, because Horner syndrome could be caused by a apical lung tumor, Pancoast tumor, and we'll talk about that later. So this superior cervical ganglion is at the carotid bifurcation, as you notice, at the carotid bifurcation. So it reaches the superior cervical ganglion. So just the bits I'm circling is a bit better to pay attention to, ignore everything else. So hypothalamus, first order neurons travel down the brainstem to the ciliospinal budge, and there's a synapse, and then the second order neurons go over the long apex and reach the superior cervical ganglion at the carotid bifurcation. And from here, the third order neurons, they ascend along the carotid artery, internal carotid artery, into the cavernous sinus, and ultimately synapse at the dilator pupillae and the Muller's muscle of the eyelids. So Muller's muscle, that is why we see the ptosis in Horner syndrome, because the Muller's muscle is not getting the sympathetic innervation from as much because of the, for example, it could be a pancreas tumor. So the sympathetic innervation is affected, so that's why it affects the Muller's muscle. So you can see, so just to go over that one more time, first order neuron hypothalamus to the ciliospinal center. The second order neurons go over the long apex, reach the superior cervical ganglion, and the third order neurons travel in the cavernous sinus after following the internal carotid artery, and then reach, using the long ciliary nerve, reach the dilator pupillae and the Muller's muscle of the eyelids. So that gives you an overview of both pathways. So the next thing to have a look at, I was going to go over, was the accommodation reflex. So this is what we're looking at, the accommodation reflex now. Accommodation reflex. So I've got a separate flowchart here. So the key thing to know about the accommodation reflex is that it's also consensual, like the consensual pupillary reflex. And the accommodation reflex has three main outcomes. So the three main outcomes are constriction of the pupils, convergence, sorry about my writing, and there is lens thickening. So just to keep in mind, those are the main things from the accommodation reflex. So let's take a look at the pathway. So again, we've got left eye, right eye. Let's pretend that's left eye, right eye. So accommodation reflex, if I was to ask you to look at the tip of my pen, if there was a pen in front of you, and I was to draw that in towards your eyes would converge together and your pupils would constrict as well. So what happens is that you have impulses from the retina, and now because the accommodation reflex uses visual information and depth perception rather than a light stimulus, you need to involve the visual cortex at the back of your, in the occipital lobe, because you're interpreting more a visual image rather than a light stimulus. So that's why we use the visual cortex in this pathway. So impulses from the retina reach the lateral geniculate nucleus this time. So in the light reflex, remember that they go to the pretextual nucleus, but actually in the accommodation reflex, they go to the lateral geniculate nucleus in the thalamus. And fibers from here reach the visual cortex. Okay, and the visual cortex then, through a series of pathways, stimulate both the ending of Westphal, or particularly, let me go back. So retina to lateral geniculate nucleus to the visual cortex. Now from the visual cortex, two things to know that's stimulated. So the oculomotor nucleus is stimulated. The oculomotor nucleus is the origin of the somatic fibers of the cranial nerve 3 nucleus, of the cranial nerve 3. And from here, they stimulate the medial recti to contract. The medial recti are the extraocular muscles towards the nasal side, and they produce an adduction action of your eyes. So if you were to imagine both of your eyes adducting, that corresponds to that convergence, the end result of convergence of the accommodation reflex. So that's why we have the medial recti initiate that convergence of the accommodation reflex, because the visual cortex stimulates the ocular motor nucleus to produce that. In addition to that, both the ending of Westphal nuclei are stimulated. So both ipsilateral and contralateral side. And then from here, it follows a similar pathway to the light reflex. So both the ciliary ganglion fibers reach the ciliary ganglion and then produce constriction, but also lens thickening. So let's fill these gaps in. So visual cortex, remember, ocular motor nucleus on the other side, because we've got two ocular motor nuclei, and medial rectus on the other side. So both ending of Westphal nuclei are stimulated. And the fibers from here also produce the lens thickening from the ciliary ganglion as well. So you get three result. You get the triple result of constriction, convergence, and lens thickening. So that produces a more focused image. So that's an overview of all the reflexes that we need to know for ophthalmology in terms of the pupillary side of things. So accommodation, light, direct, light, concentric reflex.